There's a Tony Lanni who is a realtor in Providence, Rhode Island, and there are a lot of videos and articles on Google about him if you type that name into the search engine. I want to know about the Tony Lanni who currently is vice president of production at Film 45 / Endeavor. There needs to be a video on him about his story, and that's what we are going to do here today. I'm Bryan Fenley, tennis broadcaster, do different sports with other networks. This is the On to Something podcast. We're going to roll out Tony's story in a way that illuminates his upbringing, growing up with Italian immigrants, taking you through his life with depth, uncut, to look at the now father who has found this beautiful harmony between work and life. That balance, not an easy thing to achieve in this industry, considering how high demand sports media and entertainment are. He has just about conquered that industry, that set of industries and more. And we're going to learn about his mindset in the industry, of course, but also his approach to fatherhood and get the personal side of him as well. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe. Here it is, my chat with Tony. Tony, I am so excited to have you on. I know we've talked about this for a while. I am a big fan of everything that you're doing in the industry and beyond. Thanks so much for being a part of this star-studded cast of guests that I've had on, because obviously you fit right into that criteria.
Well, you're very kind. And yeah, no, it's definitely an honor to be, put in the same platform as all the other guests you've had, and I've watched many of them. So, but thanks. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
That piece of artwork behind you.
That is just something
did you draw that?
It was just it was just a very bare wall, and I had to do something. People are like, "Where are you? Like in your garage?" I'm like, "Oh no, our offices are very industrial." So I had to kind of brighten up that wall. So that's what that is.
So much of what you do in the industry is in a form of art. What do you look at as to be the art that entices your senses the most?
Well, it's actually interesting to say that because initially when I got out of college, I wanted to pursue a career in music. I was a musician in my teenage years, and being realistic, I knew I wasn't going to be in a rock band or anything. So, but I figured, let me find a career in music, either as an audio mixer or a record producer. And it was just very difficult to find work in that field at that time. And I kind of stumbled upon sports television and didn't really know much about it. I mean, I was a sports fan. I as well. I was a big Mets fans, Jets fans. I subscribed to Sports Illustrated, and I kind of was a sports geek as well. But I had no idea of what went into producing a live sports event and some of the other components of a live sports event, like the features and what have you. And then I kind of saw those folks as artists as well, and that kind of said, maybe some of the things that I've learned as studying music and playing music, some of those skills might be able to transfer into this field. And over time, I kind of looked at my peers as, artists as well, especially, the producers and directors, of course, but most specifically the feature producers at the time, because they were telling these little 2 to 3 minute stories about some of the athletes and some of the production value that went into it. And I was kind of drawn to that initially. And that was kind of what I did for the first few years of my career, just kind of supporting feature producers, then getting a chance to actually produce some of my own features. So we're artists as well. I guess you could say that about a lot of the folks that work in sports media, for sure.
If I were to assemble and organize a feature on your musical career, what would I learn about you in that 2 to 3 minute portrait of you?
No, it wasn't much. I was basically playing a lot of garage bands and doing a lot of Rush and Pink Floyd covers, in the mid '80s. And that was it. And I kind of, there was a lot of other people that were just so much better at me. I was a guitar player. But I kind of I love music, so I tried to find a career path to get into that. But it was it was very difficult to kind of find your way in. There wasn't a lot of opportunities. And then at the time, an older sister of mine who was finance major, accounting, she had gotten a job as a an accounts payable clerk at a company called Capital Cities, and they owned ABC at the time. And she had heard that, you like sports, right? I'm like, yeah. So they're looking for some young people to come in and sort of log these football games with college football, and it's pays $50 a day, if you want to do it. So, and that's how I kind of got into sports production. I was a logger for the at the time ABC Sports was still sort of carrying the all of the top college football matchups every Saturday, and they would show highlights of other games, and then myself and an army of other 20 somethings would log play by play each game, and then we would give it to a highlights producer who would then take the key plays and cut a 30-second highlight package of other games that were going on in the country. And I just, the energy of it and the immediacy of just the pressure, it was just like at first overwhelming, but then like I was like, oh my god, like there's so much energy that goes into things that you kind of take for granted when you're watching sports television. You have no idea what it takes to, back then especially, with the technology being what it was back in the late 80s, it was yeah, I was just drawn to that too. And like I said, just the artistry of just making the decision making on the fly, and then getting all of this information down to a host that sits on a a studio, sits on at a studio desk, and the shot sheets and all of that was just I had no idea. And then I just found more and more opportunities in sports media, working as a freelance production assistant. I then got an opportunity to be full-time at USA Network. Back then, carried a lot of sports programming. Back then, people might not remember, but they had the US Open tennis contract, and carried all of the midweek matches, and CBS would come in on the weekends and produce their broadcast. Then learned a lot from my years there, and then so on, and just kind of kept going forward. And at first, like I said earlier, feature producing was kind of what I wanted to do, but then over time I kind of grew more of an affinity for live production, and that's kind of where I kind of landed, and kind of what I kind of do now is just sort of supervise a lot of our live productions, our live special events, our live coverage of some sports events like the New York City Marathon, Boston Marathon. So it's been kind of quite a journey, but I was lucky to kind of touch every sort of component in some way of a live broadcast. So fortunate for that.
You mentioned obviously you working in live production with marathons. How much of the importance of looking at this industry and our careers in it should be devoted to looking at it as a metaphorical marathon runner, as opposed to, say, just a sprint? And how
Yeah, no, absolutely. For sure, it's yeah, you have to pay your dues even now still. It's it's a lot of long years of just being a production assistant, supporting whomever you're supporting, either the producer, the director, the graphics department, the videotape department. So yeah, it's just, you have to kind of just grind it out for a few years. It comes, eventually your time comes, that opportunity comes if you work hard and stick with it. A lot of patience, of course, throughout. I remember at the time, when I was working as a logger, and then sometimes just as what they call a runner at ABC Sports. They still had ABC Wide World of Sports on Saturdays, and it was a studio show that kind of wrapped around a lot of other highlights of sports from around the world. And it was just basically someone just making copies of the formats and running and getting coffee for the talent. But you do take in a lot. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize how much. I don't think you realize it until later in your career, how much you absorb and how much you observe by being in those supporting roles early on in your career. And I think those are skills that you take with you later when you produce and direct, and you kind of know what everybody's doing on the set and have an affinity and a respect for everybody's role. So I think it's a good thing that there's this sort of this apprenticeship where people come in at entry levels and then kind of work their way through, I think. And it is a marathon, like you said, for sure.
as you have worked your way through those different stages, and you mentioned logging early on, high energy environment, but there is a certain script that you have to follow as far as what you're supposed to do. And then, as you said, you hand things off to the host, the anchor, and you continue to watch a game or another. There's not a whole lot of individual creativity in that. That would come for you. And the process, as you said, taking these skills, being a good observer, which I think is so important as to how you've been able to make your career what it is. But when did you finally feel like you were really able to express your creative voice and find that? And how long that took for you to get to that stage after starting out in a place where you were all involved in things, but there was a certain game plan you had to follow. And then you were given the liberty and the creativity and the independence to then take those skills and then do whatever you want with them and be that voice, that creative voice.
Yeah, well, sure. I was fortunate that I got an opportunity early on after I guess I was around 23, 24 years old. I got this opportunity to work for a startup based in Washington, D.C. And it was essentially, it was an outfit called the Sports News Network. And it was essentially Sports Center all day long, or like ESPN News. It was just a 24-hour sports desk. And I got a lot of, like, they were just looking for young people to kind of just, they wanted to just throw them into the fire and just see how they would do. And I got an opportunity to produce at the time what they would call packages, like a news like video package on a certain story, 2 minutes that they would roll into the broadcast. So early on, I got that opportunity and I saw it then, but it didn't, the entity didn't really last very long, wasn't very well funded. So I had that great opportunity and I'm like, oh, I could do this. I have this confidence to do it, but I didn't get another opportunity to do that again for another few years. So again, a marathon, like, and there's no straight line between points A, B, and C. Sometimes there's some peaks and valleys early in your career. So I went from like being like sort of a story producer, packages producer, learning how to write for television, going into an edit room with an editor, putting together a 2-minute video package that was playing on at the time, a national cable network, though they were only about like 5 million homes, but they were still considered a national cable network. And then from there, when they went under and had to go back into the real, I went from there to like becoming like a tape librarian at the USA Network and, managing all the clips of all the sports properties we own. So, and, you have to just kind of take that as it is. Oh, like, all right, but, this is a little valley. I'll get back to another peak soon. And then those peaks and valleys then kind of even out as you go through your career. But early on, there's a lot of highs and lows. You get this opportunity in one place, that opportunity is no longer there. You might have to then step down a little bit, take a step back or 2 steps back, but then eventually you'll make 3 steps forward and you'll keep, over the trajectory over time is up. And I think that discourages a lot of people early on. But that's what I would advise to anyone that's in the industry, like, oh, I had this great gig and now I don't. And now like I have to I feel like I'm starting over. You're really not starting over. You're just proving yourself to a new group, to a new entity. And that's kind of what I went through early in my career. And then after that, maybe like it wasn't until like my late 20s or late 30s when I finally realized like I was established somewhat as maybe a feature producer, somebody who also directs and produces live events. And then over time, then I realized like, let me just focus more on the live production, and kind of was sort of a natural, sort of organic sort of transition for me. It was something that I felt like was the path that, that made the most sense, and kind of stuck to that since then.
The peaks and valleys, which you mentioned, you have had to be battle tested. And it goes back to the idea of it being a marathon, in that, sure, maybe there's something that gets in your way, but then, like you said, a step or 2 back, but then you rise to the occasion. You've done that time and time again, and that's been noted in your career. Before you got to your career and the peaks and valleys of what it was like being you as a child and your upbringing, how would you articulate on what those were?
Oh, sure. So I grew up in a very traditional Italian-American family in Brooklyn. My parents were from Italy, so it was first, I guess we would call me first generation. They had designs of me being a doctor, like some of my cousins, or an architect. It was sort of like the acceptable sort of professions in our family. And I knew early on, they knew early on that I wasn't going to follow that path. And but even though they were kind of probably not crazy about taking another path, they were still very supportive. And you could tell that they prefer I gone to medical school perhaps, but supported what I was doing. And it took a while for them to kind of realize what it is that I had done. And I don't want to forget, I think it was good like 10 years in my career. And I was fortunate to work with NBC on their Olympics coverage. And it was 1996 Atlanta Games, and I worked in a sort of like a associate producer role. And back then, Dick Ebersol was very, very good to his staff, and he would roll long credits at the end of the 2 weeks of Olympic coverage, and everybody's name would be up there. All the hundreds of crew and producers and PAs, everyone got a little. They got their little name in lights at the end of the rollout of the 2 weeks of coverage. And I remember my mom and dad seeing my name, and that kind of like they kind of like, wow, like they realized like, okay, we get it now. Like, but that was kind of like, yeah, that was sort of, and it took a lot because you were always like, maybe they're right. Maybe I should just like go with something that's a little more, steady and for sure. And, not have to worry about these peaks and valleys and follow this path that everyone takes if they're going into, medicine or law or architecture. So, but that's kind of, yeah, it was sort of, and I give myself a lot of credit for kind of sticking with it, because it could have been really easy to say, yeah, my parents were right, I should probably do what's smart. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, they were kind of happy that I kind of followed what I wanted to do and had some success out of it. So yeah, so that's sort of the how the family story played out.
To what extent, even though you're well into your career now, but you think about those proving stages for you when you're first getting started and you're trying to tell your family what you do, in that you still think about, and to what extent that would be the drive that you were able to cobble together early in your career, and how much it was related to trying to seek that validation from your parents, and that in that journey, and then how much do you even think about that to this day, even though you are much more advanced and progressed in your career, but that notion of the work ethic, even if it's subconscious, that you think about or had thought about early on?
Yeah, I still think it's still there. I do. I do. I think that I think I felt like I kind of had to work really, really hard to kind of to get there, A, to show my folks that I was committed, and B, just to, being the perfectionist I was, just try to prepare as much as I could for whatever was coming up, whether it was an edit the next day or whether it's a live event in a week. I still feel like that's still kind of inherent in me, that sort of, my dad and mom were laborers. My dad worked in construction. My mom, she she sewed in a garment factory. So there was and it was funny because they actually thought I was working even too much, because they pretty much had 9 to 5 jobs, and then when they come home and they had families to raise. But when I first started working and still living at home, working jobs in Manhattan, whether ABC Sports or any other production companies that I could get work with, I was coming home late. I was taking the subway back to Brooklyn from Manhattan at 10 o'clock at night. And they were like, oh, like you're working really hard and late. And they just saw that dedication early on. And then they started having respect for what I was doing. And I think that to this day, I'm kind of still kind of validating that to either myself or to their memory or what have you. And that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing to kind of sustain, even as you go further in your career. You do have to have that work-life balance, and that's very difficult for a lot of folks in this business. I've had trouble doing that. I think I've done better at that, uh, but early on, if you're going to put in the hours, you do it early in your career, and then you figure out the life balance thing as you go forward, and you all do. So, and I think all the production companies and the networks are more cognizant of that, and they don't want people burning themselves out. So there's more of awareness of that now than there was, when I was coming up, in the late 80s, early 90s.
And there is such a craving in this industry for those to actively seek out the external validation. It's important in a way. It's healthy to an extent because it's very I would think, morale boosting to be able to know that you're doing good work, and for those outside of you to say that you are, and then to have an audience that also agrees with that. But what has been your journey in terms of the internal validation, and what it's taken for you to get to that point, or where you are in that form? Because for me, and for a lot, I don't want to speak for you, but a lot of times for me, it's like we get so caught up in the external validation that for me, I lose sight of respecting myself and having that internal validation be at a high level. Where do you find that you see that coming out the most, or where that is in your path, in your life's journey?
I think now, and it's gone through a lot of iterations. Early on, I was probably like a lot of other people, more self-absorbed and trying to
Sure.
figure, just kind of have these individual goals to produce this, especially in feature producing, because it was very solitary. There was a lot of pride of authorship of this one piece of the show that was all you, or you led by you with a few other people. I think later on, when I became more of a producer, I got to the point where it was more important to kind of just be the strong leader, and then sort of be supportive of everyone else and give everyone else the best environment to succeed. And I felt a lot better about that. It felt like, okay, I'm contributing back. It's not about me and being the person that's in the front of the truck and direct and calling the shots and getting an announcer's ears. This is more about just making sure everyone else on the crew has what they need, has all the tools and the resources they need to do their best work. So it was took a long time to get there, but finally see, like, I'm happy that I got to that point where it was just more about the production, supporting talent, supporting production, and then at the end of the time, giving the viewers exactly what they need to see, and doing our best to kind of make sure we showed the right shots, and we're timely with our replays, and also gave our viewers the best possible experience of what that event was happening in front of our live cameras for those who weren't in the stadium or along the course. So that's kind of how I look at it, from where I started and kind of where I ended up.
The interesting thing about that is I look at what you've done and the way in which you've done it, and it's so beautiful to hear how so much of this process of your career and your life is this like self exploration process. You're learning so much about yourself through this journey, and you find the beauty in what you've done outside of work. Where do you find the most beauty in your life, and what that looks like, and how that manifests itself?
um Outside of work, it's right now, it's just there's a lot of focus on my daughter, who's a teenager, and trying to kind of guide her the best I can. Learning a little bit, remembering a little bit of what my parents were like me when I was that age. Trying to kind of support her and kind of have her discover whatever that career path, whatever that dream of her is. That's kind of like where I am right now with that. And then just trying to be a little healthier and carving out time to just to be active. Early in my career, it was always work, work, work. I was blow off the gym to stay out, stay a few hours later at work, or go a few extra hours in the edit bay with the editor. I think over time, I think it's important to kind of have a healthy body and mind, and I think that just makes you the best person you can be, both in life and work. So that took me a long time to to come to, because the culture that I grew up in, or I came up in the business in, was just who could outwork each other. And there's some merit to that. There's some honor to that, but it was unhealthy. It was not a healthy environment. I remember once, I remember we were at one of the Olympic seminars. So NBC would sort of set up like a 3-day sort of kind of seminar prior to the Olympic Games, and invite all the producers, directors, associate producers. It was always kind of like an offsite, sort of a retreat. And I remember Dick Ebersol at one point said, you guys are going to be going into like 14, 16, 18-hour days over the next 2 weeks. It's like, you know, take your time to get your body right, take your, just get some rest before you could jump into this very crazy environment for 2 weeks. And it was the first time I had heard an executive kind of point that out, like, hey, we know what you guys do, what everybody, we know what all these men and women do, and we have to acknowledge that, and that we won't want anybody kind of burning themselves out. And it was kind of refreshing to hear. But even still, after that, it took me years and years and years to kind of say, all right, listen, you have to, like, you just have to be a little more productive perhaps in the days and the hours that you allot for work. And there's always that weekend when you're at a remote where you're going to put the 12, 13 hours in. But when in the weeks leading up, just try to have a little more life balance. And I think that just makes everybody better.
Having that life balance, how has that not only made you better, but you cherishing even more those moments you get with your daughter and watching her grow?
Yeah, I mean, sure. And I think that being parents, you kind of, you have to sort of kind of make time for that. Early on when she was younger, it still didn't resonate, but as she grew older, and I realized that you have to be present. And so I'm grateful that I had that awareness and that sense to, like, say to myself, okay, I got to get home. I could always check emails after she goes to bed. You just kind of work your way around. I mean, it's a very demanding business. Everybody knows that. You have to put in, you have to put in more than the 40 to 50
Sure.
hours that most folks do. It's also checking your emails on the weekend at night, especially when you're on site for an event, and when you're traveling and you're away from your family. So you just, it takes, I think, being a parent kind of pointed out to me, like, okay, this is, I have to kind of be present when I am available. And it's a good thing. Again, I'm very fortunate to have kind of made that adjustment and made that change. So it's not easy, but it happens. So, and everybody could do it.
That they can, considering after hearing your story. And it's so cool as we wrap this thing up, Tony, that being a dad for you, it centered you. It really has. And your priorities will always be high up when it comes to work, but it's shown you that there are priorities outside of work, like your family, and devoting yourself to that, which can be so hard. As you said, the work-life balance, when you're on the road and you're working 80-hour or something weeks, and it takes a toll on families. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is because how you have gone through this maturation process and just self discovery process of realizing, hey, I can be at the top of my game in the industry, which you are, but I can also experience that top of the game kind of fatherhood that you're living out right now. And so I appreciate you so
You're
much.
very kind to say that. Thank
Yes.
you. I try my best, and I appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much.
You bet, Tony. Well, it's been an honor to have you on. And I wanted to ask you one last thing. And that piece of artwork behind you, I'm going to guess that wasn't done by you.
No, I found it from like a website. It's nothing very unique or original. It just looked nice, and I just needed something quick, and it helps. It definitely helps. I got a lot of compliments about
I
that.
love it. No, I love it. Yeah, just having fun with it. Tony, I'm Bryan. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Bryan. Thanks very much. This is a pleasure. Thank you.